What's up guys, welcome back to my channel Anime Fiction. I'm back with a new episode of What If Naruto Was Teleported to Another World Part 15. And if you did enjoy this video, please give this video a like, and if you're new to my channel and like my content, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more crossover fictions. Now let's begin this new video.
Chapter 17. The Forest's Damnation. This is the start of my damnation arc. It won't be too long, and hopefully I'll be able to get through it soon because this narrative was one of the first things I thought about before starting to write this fanfiction. I hope I can stick to it. The man smoothly lifted the huge suitcase over his back and prepared for his long journey. He shifted his weight, adjusted his leaf headband, and stepped forward towards his trainee. "Alright, Sarutobi, I'm leaving things to you while we're gone," he said to the younger guy. As a small group of men and women began to gather their supplies, the man with the brown goatee looked worriedly at his instructor. "Hashirama-sama, I'm still unsure about your decision to go on this journey. We don't know what's on the other side of that path, and it's far too dangerous." "That's it, Saru. We don't know what's on the other side. If there's a place where we can thrive, a world where we can all find peace, that's something I'd risk my life for 100 times over." Hiruzen regarded his instructor with skepticism. Even though Hashirama-sama's power was unrivaled in the ninja world, they had no idea what lay on the other side. "It's okay, Hiruzen. I'll make sure Oto-sama doesn't get into any trouble on the other side," the third Hokage said as he turned to see a beautiful woman with long brown hair stroll up to them with a pleasant smile. "Just keep everything good on this side, and we'll be back as soon as possible, okay?" "Yuki-san. Well said, Yuki. Love the spirit." Hashirama turned to face the rest of his party, which was made up of seal specialists and special Anbu to follow in his footsteps. They nodded and followed in his footsteps. The sealers formed an elaborate circle around a single location in the chamber and began a long sequence of hand seals. This was a fantastic variation on the second Hokage's Hiraishin technique. In actuality, it was only conceivable because Hashirama had gone through his late brother's scrolls and created his own pseudo-version based on his late brother's intelligence. Hashirama raised his hands and concentrated and stabilized the space in the center of the seal with his massive chakra. After a little moment, the air began to ripple and fracture, revealing a small black doorway that grew larger and larger as time went. When the black tear had grown to the proper size, Hashirama beckoned for his crew to gather and ultimately pass through. As he made his first step into the big unknown universe, the father of the current ninja world smiled exuberantly, prepared to make a mark on history. X780 in December, come on, Urza, don't give up, keep pushing. Hi. Urza activated her requip, and her armor transformed into a gallant, silver plating with metal wings on her back in a flash of bright light. As she went for the blonde woman clothed in radiant light, several long swords surrounding the redhead in her heaven's wheel armor. Mahiro triumphantly beamed and charged her light power to cover her full body. She began to back up and parried Urza's swords with the back of her knuckles. The young fairy mage pushed ahead, her swords raking at the blonde combatant as she chased her through the withering treeline. Mahiro couldn't help but feel proud of how easily the young lady in front of her was keeping up with her Vega grace. Her light magic was something she could brag about for hours. It was powerful, speedy, and had a limitless number of applications as long as the user had a bright imagination. In fact, her present ability improved her speed and mobility to the point where most other individuals would be unable to catch her. But that didn't seem to dissuade Urza from pursuing her so intently. She was chasing after her, matching her speed and ferocity with her will and her large supply of magical armors. The young lady was even smiling as she chased her companion across the desolate, frost-covered forest. The Senju woman spun in the air and set her feet against a tree branch, using it as a post to leap at Urza with her punch ready. Urza accepted her dare, grasping two of her swords by the hilt and leaping up, surrounded by the other blades. The two women fought, and the force of their blows blasted away the snow surrounding them. Mahiro had Urza's two swords clenched between the flats of her fingers and palms. The young mage's other swords had been thrown off course and became embedded in the area around them. Mahiro chuckled and smiled at the girl, and Urza followed with a little smile of her own. They took a step back and put an end to their spell. Phew. That was close, Urza. You've gotten way better since we started these lessons. Mahiro wiped her brow. Urza was surrounded by light, and she was temporarily stripped nude before her basic armor reappeared, although her hair was no longer braided. I might be getting better, she said as she ran her fingers through the back of her hair, strand by strand, but I still have a long way to go before I reach your level, Mahiro. Mahiro laughed and patted her back enthusiastically. Huh, come on, honey. You're just trying to flatter and soften me up. You know, if I ever took it easy on someone like you, I'd be regretting it for the next week in a body cast. Urza gave her a deadpan look and said, sure. But look me in the eyes and tell me you were as serious fighting me as you were sparring Gildarts. Mahiro froze for a time, staring at Urza, who only gave her a cold, blank stare. She scratched her chin and gently shifted her head away from the redhead. Well, when you say it like that, she chuckled. Urza smiled and shook her head slightly. She was well aware of Mahiro's strength when she decided to pull out all the stops. Even if she didn't take regular work like the others, she could demonstrate her strength by accepting demanding requests and completing them with minimal effort. Furthermore, Mahiro did so because she believed she owed Naruto rent for allowing her and her kid to sleep in his spare room. She even sparred with Gildarts once or twice to stay active, and there was never a clear winner to be determined from such exchanges. Still, she was powerful enough to persuade all the girls in the guild to consider her as a goal to strive for, similar to how all the boys looked up to Gildarts. Urza focused her attention on her hair, a pensive expression on her face. I really do have a long way to go, she said, feeling Mahiro's strong grip on her shoulders and looking over to see her with an understanding smile on her face. These things take time, Urza. It doesn't take long for some people, and it may take years for others, but it takes time. That's why we come out here, isn't it? Urza gave a still smile and nodded her head before feeling the blonde woman's hands run through her hair and lift her head to look directly at her. But you know what I see when I look into your eyes? I see a girl who is going to become so great that I won't be able to help but look up at you in pride. That's what I see when I look at you, Urza. Urza looked at Mahiro as if she was frozen in time, full of confidence and pride in what she could do and become. She had a feeling her mother would gaze at her if she could. Yeah, thank you, Mahiro, Urza said with a nod. Mahiro laughed and smiled at the girl who reminded her of another daughter. Over the last year, she had worked, lived, fought, and assisted Urza with anything she needed. Urza guarded Koyuki like an older sister when she had to go out on a plea for money. She had grown so connected to the redhead that when one of the lads asked to hold the infant girl, she would cry and clutch Urza even more tightly. Mahiro is overjoyed if Koyuki may look up to a girl like Urza as someone she believes in. Senju, the blonde, ran her hands through her scarlet hair that wasn't in the braid. You know, you might want to think about letting your hair out more often, she said, tilting her head to the side. Urza came to a halt in her folding and looked down at her hair. Really? Yeah. I think you'd look amazing with your hair down. A real image change, but that's just my opinion, she joked before looking down and noticing how scratched up and worn out the younger woman's armor had become. Also, you should probably consider changing out your armor choices. This thing appears to have served its purpose. Urza stared down at her breastplate and drew it out in pain. I suppose, but it doesn't feel the same as it did a few months ago. It's tighter. Yeah, I bet. Huh. What was that? Mahiro shook her head. Nothing. Come on, let's go see how Oji-sama is handling the brat. She nodded her head in the opposite direction, and they continued through the woodland. Hashirama observed the microscopic flakes of snow falling from the gloomy skies over their heads. He grinned and looked down at the toddler in his lap, who was attempting to reach the sword handle that was placed beside them. He gazed down at her and said, Look, Koyuki, snow. Just like you. The little 1-year-old in the thick winter garments glanced up from her grandfather's lap and stopped fidgeting with the end of the black hilt. She noticed the small flake float down in front of her face and attempted to wrap her hands around it. When she reopened them, there was a small spot of wet on her gloves. She grinned cutely when she looked up and saw them dropping on her nose. Haha, good girl. You like snow? Hashirama said to his great-granddaughter. Ma. Hashirama chuckled and began to bounce the tiny girl on his knee while she let out her baby cheers. Hey, old man. Do you mind paying a little more attention to my training here? What are you talking about? Hashirama asked, looking out to the middle of the lake. You're doing just fine without me watching over you, Naruto. Naruto attempted to lift his head high enough to see the old guy sitting on another self-made stump on the coast. Well, this isn't your typical workout, Hashi-G. I'm working on my chakra here, damn it. Are you just going to sulk or are you going to get back to work? Gaoyu. See, Koyuki agrees. Hashirama let the small toddler grab his finger and play with her while Naruto glared angrily at the old guy who was taking advantage of the adorable baby. Naruto returned his gaze to the hand gripping the water's surface. As his left hand was placed in the fold of his back, the waves ran across his right hand. He was concentrating on using his chakra to maintain himself above water while gripping a wooden cube at the soles of his feet. It was a difficult workout, but it was extremely beneficial to his chakra control. Naruto found walking on walls and water to be a tough notion at first, but with some practice, he enjoyed it. It was a very important skill to have in a hurry forgetting about the environment, and it also assisted when he was on a request. He particularly enjoyed scaring everyone when he ran up the guild's walls and atop the lake behind the building. Natsu was so envious of him that he attempted running up the walls as well. As expected, it ended miserably. Naruto closed his eyes and began to shape chakra around his arms and legs. Wind began to build around his limbs in the form of uncontrolled, compacted tornadoes surrounding his body. The swirling wind began to gather up speed, causing the lake water to ripple and widen apart. He tightened up and lowered himself closer to the sea as the gusts picked up speed. Wind style. Cyclone palm. Says the wind. As the wooden cube clutched at the soles of his feet broke into splinters, the water beneath his fingers exploded in a huge pit surrounding the blonde youngster. Naruto was flying in the air, a wide grin on his face, while Koyuki laughed and clapped her hands in delight. Woohoo! See that Hashi-G. No one's gonna be able to stop me now. Ha 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 ha, Naruto said triumphantly as he spun through the air. Heads up. Naruto didn't turn his head quickly enough to see the enormous boulder smash into his side and crush him into the lake. Hashirama and Koyuki watched the bubbles slowly disappear from the surface before turning to see who threw them. Looks like he could still use a little training, Haoji-sama. Was Koyuki alright? Urza said as Mahiro emerged from the forest, yawning. Of course she was. Hashirama grinned and glanced down at his youngest offspring. She loves spending time with Gramp, don't you, Koyuki? The toddler attempted to tear herself free of her great-grandfather's clutches and held her arms out to her mother, giggling. Mahiro swooped in and snatched up her daughter while spinning on her feet, causing the tiny Senju girl to squeal with delight. Hashirama froze in his seat as the mother and daughter pair laughed together. Urza stepped up behind him and caressed his back, saying, There, it's okay. As Naruto drew himself out of the lake, the water's edge blew up. Before he died, he shook the water out of his hair and yanked his wet shirt off over his head. He began wringing the water out of his garments and flapping them until they were dry. This displayed his figure and muscles that he had grown over the last few years. Mahiro groaned and brought Koyuki closer to her chest, displaying the yellow fairy tattoo on her left forearm. Another thing she saw over the last year was that the kids were entering a certain biological stage. The boys were getting taller and their bodies were getting more defined in terms of muscular definition. And the girls had begun to outgrow their old outfits. That explains why Urza's armor was becoming too tight. Naruto summoned his fire dragon sword and placed it on the blade, igniting it just enough to provide enough heat to dry his clothing. He scowled at Mahiro. Seriously, Mahiro, did you have to throw that stuff at me like that? The Senju woman simply laughed and grinned. Well, you looked like you were getting a big head, so I had to bring you back to Earthland. But into the lake? During winter? What if I had frozen to death? He scoffed, returning his gaze to his weapon. Naruto. Gray walks around in weather like this all the time. Naked. I'm pretty sure you're safe for a quick dip. The whiskered lad sighed and re-equipped his sword until he was only left with his shirt. He raised his hand to catch something heading at his head. He blinked in astonishment as he gazed down at the pink towel in his hand. It's better that you dry yourself off before you catch a cold. He turned to face Urza, who approached him with her arms crossed in front of her chest and a smile on her face. Don't want you to get sick right before the announcement. Naruto grinned and began wiping his face and hair with her towel, saying, Thanks, Urza. While Naruto dried his body, Urza stared up at the falling snow. Despite the fact that his magic and chakra had leveled up dramatically in the previous year, he still received new scars from all of his efforts. Despite the fact that they had riddled his body with injured skin, he took pride in surviving his fights and emerging stronger from each one. "It looks like your training is going very well," she said, lowering her head and smiling. "Any more, and you'll be able to generate actual tornadoes in no time." He chuckled at her joke and returned the towel to her. "What about you?" He began to pull his shirt back down over his torso. "Are you showing Mahiro who the toughest girl in Fairy Tail is?" Urza maintained her smile while shaking her head. "I believe she is being gentle with me. She said she was gradually easing me into her pace." As Hashirama and Mahiro gazed on, she and Naruto both giggled at their training methods. The two young adults stopped laughing and remained silent. "I'm really nervous." "Yeah, me too. Do you think we'll be able to make it?" "I'm hoping so. We've worked our tails off throughout the last year. I deserve this after Gigi kept giving me crap about that probation nonsense from last year." Urza smacked him across the head for his shouting. "What you did last year wasn't something you could brush off as a little blunder. You stole an S-class reservation. Master has every right to be angry with you." Yeah. Naruto mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. Both of them were smiling as he looked over his shoulder and she looked up at him. "You know that if we get picked, only one of us is going to make it, right?" "Of course," she says. "But that would only mean we had a long way to go." Urza and Naruto exchanged nods and turned around to face each other. They formed a X with their right arms. "One of us is going to be an S-class mage," says one of the others. They both cheered together, ready for whatever came after the S-class exam nominations this afternoon. Mahiro pushed her grandfather with her elbow, saying, "They're so cute, riling each other up like that." Hashirama chuckled, must be their honeymoon phase. The Senju members laughed at their small talk before hearing a loud yell reach their ears. With Urza by his side, Naruto was waving at them over his head. "All right, you two. Are you coming, or are we just going to leave you here to freeze?" Mahiro reached down and assisted her elderly grandfather in rising to his feet. They trailed the younger pair as they dashed out of the woods and approached their guild for the momentous announcement. The throng surrounding the training grounds applauded as a young knight fell on his buttocks. The man wiped the back of his head and gripped his slightly injured chest from his opponent's forceful attacks. He looked up at his opponent, leader, giving a hand to help him stand up again. "Wow!" he exclaimed in awe. "Captain Sorrento, you're as tough as ever." As he helped his subordinate back to his feet, the tall, silver-haired squadron chief chuckled. "Haha, it's just years of practice, kid. Give yourself some time to explore how far you can push yourself with minimal effort." He rubbed his hands against his robe and turned to address the remainder of his current army, saying, "Okay, men. Who wants to put me through in the next round?" "No thank you, sir," exclaimed all of his guys. "All right then," Alexander exclaimed, chuckling. "I anticipate that all of you will get some training in today. That's a command." "Yes, sir." The captain of the Royal Guard exited the training grounds and made his way to his private quarters. Today was his day off, and he was spending it in Mercurius Castle training his men and relaxing. He heard footsteps approaching from down the hall as he approached his room. "Captain Sorrento, do you have a minute?" Sorrento turned to face the man who had demanded his attention. He noticed a tall young man dressed in formal attire and sporting a little scar on the left side of his nose. Darton-san, right?" he asked, turning to face the young man. "What exactly are you doing here?" The newly appointed Minister of Defense lowered his head in honor of the formidable captain. "I'm sorry for disturbing you on your day off, sir, but I have an urgent report that you need to see." He took a folder in his hand and handed it up to the captain. Sorrento took the folder and began to file through everything with a careful eye. He browsed through graphs, a weather statistic study, and a few crude drawings, until he came across the reports produced by their specialists on the cause of these weird occurrences. An unknown entity is causing strange phenomenon to occur outside of a local town. He wondered after a few seconds. "Yes, sir. Numerous residents have reported seeing something moving through the jungle and snatching their stuff from beneath their noses. A issue like this would normally be handled by a magical guild, but with such an anomaly in the energy readings, we just wanted to check in. And that's where I come in, right?" With a confident smile, The royal captain stated innocently. Okay, okay. Allow me to gather my equipment and form a team. Darton bowed deeply in appreciation to his superior. Thank you very much, Captain Sorrento. Don't even think about it. I will defend this country whenever and however I can, he returned, wearing his cherry blossom chief knight armor and a wizard saint medallion fastened to his shirt collar. That's why I took this job. Gildarts, you have to come train with me. The fairy tale's orange-haired ace had no idea what was going on. The guild was buzzing, disputing, and generally excited about the announcement that was going to be made. But the strangest thing was that one of his juniors had approached him and asked for fighting instruction. And it wasn't the usual frantic little rosy-haired brat he had grown accustomed to. He put his finger into his ear, a surprised idiotic expression on his face, and said, I'm sorry. Mira, what did you just say? The young woman in black gothic clothing banged her fists against the bar, forcing her white hair bangs to swing about her facial frame. I'm telling you, I need your assistance in studying for the exam. So, get off your lazy ass, sober up, and fight me. Myra's unexpected suggestion caught everyone off guard, including Gildarts. The younger generation was completely taken aback by the sight of the oldest Strauss girl approaching the senior S-class mage for assistance. Gray massaged his eyes softly before returning his gaze to them. Is this really going on? Is Mira really asking the old man for assistance, or am I hallucinating? Kana rushed over, grabbed Gray's cheek, and roughly twisted it till Gray's head bowed forward. She let go and returned her gaze to the scene in front of her. Nope, you're not dreaming. Ow. Kana, that's not how it works. As her companion yelled at her, she stoically drank the mild alcoholic beverage from her mug. Well, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't trapped in your dream as well. Ain't it obvious? As Natsu rose from his seat, the children smiled smugly at him. Mira knows she'll probably have to fight us in the exam, so she's preparing. She's probably too afraid to think straight. The young fairy mages simply groaned and shook their heads in dismay. Are you sure about that, Natsu? Said the little blue cat sitting on the table as he spread his wings and flew up in front of Natsu. Mira, I thought you could just pick you up and hurl you around town like a pansy punk? Natsu was furious at his little blue friend. What the hell happened, Happy? Aren't you supposed to be cheering for me at times like this? I know, the small cat giggled into his paws. But, in every aspect, I'm more realistic than you. And I know when your butt is going to be served to you on a platter. Gaw. Traitor. Elfman moved anxiously in his seat at the table. Because the middle Strauss child had begun to grow rapidly, this small action put a lot of strain on the table. He literally began to tower over the other kids his age and was even passing some of the adults. I hope Nei-chan doesn't do anything rash before the announcement. He worriedly gazed over at his older sister. After all of her damage reports, she doesn't need to be in any more difficulty. Lisana's sparkling blue eyes were filled with concern as she gazed at her older sister. Mira Nei. Over the last 3 months, her sister had been constantly practicing and responding to as many inquiries as she could. Her motivation in recent weeks has been to pass the S-class exam. Gildarts, please. Just a little assistance would suffice. Gildarts set his cup down before settling into his chair. Wow, wow, wow. Keep your cool, youngster. Why do you want me to train alongside you? Mira huffed and took a deep breath as she appeared to be about to have a nervous breakdown. Naruto asked old man Hashirama to assist him in his training, and now he walks on walls and water. And little soldier Urza got Mahiro for herself, and if I asked her to spar with me, I'd feel like a runner-up. Gildarts scratched his brow in perplexity. Well, if you wanted to spar with someone stronger than you, why didn't you ask Sparky? Mira simply gave him a blank stare. Do you really think Laxus would agree to help me prepare for the exam? I doubt it. No, he cleaned his smudged brow with his palm before turning to face the young woman dressed in gothic garb. So you want my help because you don't think you'll pass the exam without it? Oh no, that is not the case. Gildarts blinked in astonishment at her quick response. It doesn't matter if you agree to help me or not. I'm going to pass that exam and become an S-class mage as well. She crossed her arms and said boldly. I only wanted your assistance to make things simpler, not to make them possible. Gildarts took a peek at Mirajane before matching her grin with his own. Well said, young man. so I guess I don't have much to lose. Hey. We've arrived. Did we overlook anything significant? Naruto triumphantly announced as he marched into the guild, followed by Urza, Hashirama, Mahiro, and Koyuki. Hey Naruto. Gray called out to the two young fairy magicians. You will not believe it. Mirajane actually says, Gil Ga. The Ice Mage's speech was cut short when he was beamed in the face by a bar stool. Mira had her arm outstretched and a hot flush across her face as Naruto and Urza looked over. Stop talking, Gray. Don't talk about things like that casually. Naruto and Urza stared between the takeover mage and the young man who was screaming on the floor while holding his face. Wait. What's up with Mira? Mirane is just embarrassed because she doesn't want you guys to know she's asking Gildarts for some fighting lessons. Lisana. Mirajane raged at her sister, shocked by her obvious betrayal. It's nothing you should be ashamed of, Mirane, Lisana said with a nice grin. I admire your desire to train for something like this. It just goes to show how committed you are to win this fairly. She concluded her sentence with a happy grin on her face. Urza noticed Mirajane becoming uneasy and attempting to divert attention away from herself. Is that true, Mirajane? She asked as she approached her adversary. Are you going to train for the exam with Gildarts? Mira raised her head and stared at Urza, who kept her smile intact. She huffed and crossed her arms across her chest, imitating Urza's posture. I mean, who cares? I'm only doing this because you backed down and asked Mahiro for aid instead of dealing with it yourself. Urza's surprised expression dissolved into a frown at the white-haired girl, before she was smirking and giggling. Is that all, Mirajane? Are you afraid I'll leave you in the dust? Please Urza, you don't have to keep that cute little tough guy act up with me, Mirajane mocked. I know you're trembling at the prospect of finally confronting me seriously without anyone stopping me from serving your big ass up. It's tough girl, dumbass. Sure, keep telling yourself that, Butch. Mahiro strolled over to the kids' table with a bright smile on her face as the girls were staring each other down. Happy, I believe your #1 fan wants to say hello to you again. Happy became terrified and attempted to flee from her. No way, Mahiro-sama. Never again. My kitty ribs can't handle it any longer Gwa. The small Senju toddler yanked the blue cat down by his tail and glomped him fiercely. Gao. Koyuki exclaimed gleefully as she wrapped her arms around Happy so tightly that his eyes began to jump out of his head. Despite his moans of pain, it was so amusing to witness that everyone around him was laughing. Until they heard a door behind the bar counter bang open. What's the deal with all this commotion? As he waddled out of the rear door and got atop the counter to take a seat, the ancient third master of fairy tale demanded. When he opened his eyes, he saw all the young magicians gathered around him, waiting for him. Ji-san. Who do you think it'll be? Yeah. Come on, people. Come on, people. Inform us. Gigi, we're ready right now. Makarov extended his enormous palm and drove the kids back so far that they were pressed up against the tables. You little brats shouldn't get too excited just yet, he withdrawn his arm. I'll make the news later, so be nice little rugrats and wait until I'm ready. The more nervous of the teenagers scoffed at their master, while some of the more composed members decided to wait out the time period. Someone grabbed the end of Hashirama's shirt to draw his attention as he was walking to the bar. When he turned back, he saw a young short girl with shoulder-length blue hair beaming up at him. Hello. Again, Hashirama-san. Hello, Levi, you appear to be pretty excited. Are you preparing for the announcement? Yeah. Levi grinned uneasily, but I don't think I'll qualify anytime soon. Don't be like that, Levi, the old man said, smiling down at the young script Mage. 6. I'm sure one day you'll grow into a brilliant mage, and you'll be a wonderful S-class wizard. Levi paused, surprised, before nodding and smiling at his remarks. Hashirama-san, please keep telling me more about your old hometown stories. I'd like to hear more about the conflict between your family's business and your friend Madara's family. Hashirama chuckled pleasantly as he brushed Levi's wild hair. I'd love to, but not today. I'll tell you again another time, okay? Levi nodded and returned to her table with Jed and Droy. He appreciated conversing with the brave young script mage. She was well educated and was always interested in hearing his shortened history, a true history buff. And, after learning about her past and her struggles with damnation, he felt obligated to listen to whatever she desired. All the people harmed by Sorrento and his soldiers felt the same way. Hashirama approached the bar counter and sat next to Makarov, who was pouring 2 mugs of liquor. You've been telling them stories about your home. He pushed 1 mug over to the elderly ninja. Hashirama received the drink and nodded softly. Business? I censored my story for the kids. Better to give them half-truths than nightmares that will haunt them at night. Plus they seem to really like my stories and it's fun to see their reactions to my past. He sipped his drink while Makarov hummed in agreement. Hashirama observed the guild members cheerfully conversing with smiles on their faces, which made him smile back. This guild always seems to be in high spirits. Doesn't it help to go through each day with a smile and friends rather than being alone? Makarov swirled his drink in his cup as he stared off fondly at his children. The short fairy mage trudged through town unhappily, his arms behind his spiky blonde head. Is there even anything we can do about this request? It seems more like a rumor about a thief than a phenomenal beast. The well-dressed man examined the request in his palm before looking around the town plaza. I'm telling you, Maki-chan. People are scared about these sightings, but you could be right about this being a thief. Bob cupped his chin in concentration. It could be some kind of ghost. Or maybe it's just an animal roaming around town. It makes sense that a starving animal would take what it can from the sources around it, a young pink-haired woman commented as she looked through the local businesses with her pals. Poor Lyuzuka-chan has a point as well. Maybe we just got a bad deal when we chose Maki-chan. I guess that'll be the last time we let you pick our next job, huh? Bob added with a dazzling smile and laugh as his pal turned his head and scowled at the pretty kid. Shut up, Bobby. It's not like you could have made a better choice. Ha ha ha. Calm down you two. There's no reason to make a scene in front of all these poor people. Poor Lyuzuka, Bob, and Makarov looked over to see the remainder of their crew arrive, each carrying a bag of goods. We picked up a few snacks, said Rob, the largest man in the group, smiling behind the apple in his lips. Goldmine smirked and fingered through his grocery bag, and some tips too. He brought out 3 cans of beer and handed one to each of his teammates. Makarov lowered his gaze to the beer. Are you sure? We've been thinking about it. It could just be a thief or another animal doing all this. Rob chewed into his apple with both teeth. Yeah, well, Maki, some people in town might think otherwise. Yujima went up alongside him and glanced over the goods he'd purchased. When their stuff was stolen, witnesses and shop owners said they saw something move in the corner of their eye, and when they turned around, all they saw was a shadow or some leaves falling down on the floor, which means we're dealing with someone who can flee a crowded town in the blink of an eye without leaving a trace. Makarov grinned and chugged his glass in under a minute. A quick, smooth, faster than the eye thief. Huh. Hee hee. I'm anxious to meet them. He crushed his can and slung it over his shoulder. Hash 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 hunter hash 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 hash. In the midst of their campgrounds, Hashirama fiddled with the flames, surrounded by his expedition team. He gazed about at the peaceful forest they'd found themselves in and smiled gratefully. This place. It's really beautiful. Hokage-sama, please concentrate on the task at hand. The first Hokage returned his gaze to the senior specialist he was speaking with concerning the world's escape strategy. Right, sorry about that. You were saying Ango. Yes, well, from what we have been able to discern from the information gathered through the adjacent town, this world does not appear to be in any state of warfare. The specialist adjusted her glasses and flipped through more of her notepaper. There is a non-aggression pact between the countries that promises no interference with each other's personal states of being. It is similar to what you agreed to with the other nations, but this appears to have been initiated decades ago. Yukiha came in on the exchange, shocked. Well, that's good to hear. At least there don't appear to be any fragile peace talks, as there were back home. Hashirama grunted blankly in response to her statement. Even while the elemental nations attempted to retain the peace between their borders, the agreements broke through too readily. If they had continued to discuss and established a fair deal, perhaps the World War would not have occurred. Tobirama might still be alive. Yes, but even though there are no international disputes taking place in this world, it has a higher rate of crime and infighting in the nations than ours does, the specialist explained as she laid out several notes. This, magic, is something they use on a regular basis and can be taught and learned by anyone with sufficient enough abilities. No prior consideration of the user's mental state or supervision from a reliable teacher will lead to unstable factions being fortified. Ango's right. I've heard around town that more and more groups are breaking away from their primary authority and dealing with darker mission requests, like assassinations and terrorist bombings. Yukiha looked over at her father, who was focused on the details. It wouldn't be safe to bring civilians into a state of disdain like this. And also, there is something about this world that doesn't feel natural. Your chakra signatures feel extremely diluted, and the spatial jutsu can't stabilize as well here. We can barely keep it open long enough to send our reports back home, and even then, we can't be certain if they make it to the other side, Ango said seriously. Yukiha agreed with a nod. She's right, Oto-sama. It wouldn't be ideal for our village to relocate here until we properly contact the local government and find a way to live here while retaining our chakra. You're right. But this place is very peaceful in comparison to our home, so it would still be beneficial if we. Hashirama paused and glanced up in surprise. Hokage-sama? Oto-sama. Someone is coming. The entire expedition team sprang to their feet, with the Anbu ninja leading the way to intercept anyone who attempted to enter their base. I can't sense them. Without chakra, I can't tell. Ango peered about. Chakra. What exactly is that? The light from the fire began to shine off a gleaming metal surface as it emerged from the darkness of the tree line. As a young man with silver hair moved out into their sight, the sound of metal boots crossing the earth rang through their ears. A dozen additional warriors in basic knight armor slowly trailed after him. His cape swayed as he sat down and smiled at the ninja expedition team, lifting his arms in peace. Please don't attack. I mean no harm, Sorrento murmured, a tiny smile on his face. My name is Alexander Sorrento, and I serve as the chief squadron leader of the Royal Guard and the Cherry Blossom Holy Knights. At his words, the Anbu and Yukiha tensed, and the SEAL expert teams took their own inexperienced fighting postures. Until Hashirama raised his arms in front of them and marched ahead of his squad, dismissing his expedition team's whispers of fear. He returned a modest smile before coming to a halt a good distance away from the armored figure. Hello, Sorrento Dono, my name is Hashirama Senju, and we wish you no harm. That's great. It's nice to meet you, Hashirama-san. Now, what on earthland are you and your little group of scouts doing out here? Hold your tongue, screamed one of the Anbu, glaring at the armored knight. You're speaking to the first Hokage, fool, leader of Konohagakure and Shinobi God. Show him your respect. You don't have to defend me, it was just a harmless question, Hashirama said to his faithful follower. Silence yourself, heathen. Don't you know who you're talking to? Yelled one of the Royal Knight Guards, defending his captain. This is Alexander Sorrento-sama, the man personally chosen by the royal family to be captain of the Royal Guard and one of the 10 wizard saints. You will show him your respect, bastards. Sorrento made a soothing motion toward the younger man. Now, don't get hostile. There's no reason we need to antagonize these people for no reason. I'm sorry, Hashirama-san. He looked over at Hashirama and totaled him up with a calculating eye. He didn't seem terrified or concerned about the situation, remaining calm even while the rest of his crew worried about what might happen next. It's fine. There's no need to apologize. Oh, I think I do. Because, even though you appear to have such a high standing among your colleagues, I've never heard of you. Even among our best information networks, I've never heard of Hashirama, the god of shinobi. He maintained a confident smile even as the strange older man and his group narrowed their eyes at his deduction. And, while I prefer to keep my modesty, most men in this world would panic at the prospect of facing one of the wizard saints, so who the hell are you? Hashirama swallowed a little lump in his throat during his examination. He flashed a feeble smile and nodded. You have quite a keen eye for detail, being able to take note of something like that. Yes, if it was a threat from any other random ninja I've met over the years, I would have just ignored what they said. You see, ninjas around here aren't as well equipped and numerous as the mages in Fury, but neither you nor any of your team hold yourselves like amateurs. You each have a solid, experienced look in your stances that says that you do this for a living. And if they're... I understand, Hashirama said, motioning for his men to lower their rifles. They were hesitant at first, but Yukiha ordered them to stand down once the former Hokage looked at his daughter. I am not a resident of this country, or even this dimension, he said to the wizard saint. None of us are. Sorrento and his guys were taken aback by the man's statement. My team and I, we all come from a different world, where the idea of magic and mages exists only in books. There. Our primary occupation is that of ninjas. And we use our own form of power to create techniques similar to yours, with chakra. I know this is odd, and probably unbelievable, but we truly mean no harm. We only wish to cohabitat with you all in this peaceful world away from warfare. The knights all looked at him in amazement before most of them began to laugh in ridicule of his story. Sorrento, who maintained his stone expression while staring at Hashirama, was the only one who did not react badly. You'll understand if I have a hard time believing your story. It sounds a bit fantastical, like the ravings of a madman, he said, feigning a chuckle and relaxing his stance. The Anbu ninja growled and fingered their weapon packs and swords in rage. In exchange, the knights clutched their weapons in readiness for retaliation. Yes. I understand, Hashirama said calmly, but please, our people back home are in desperate need of safekeeping. War has ravished our lands and depleted our nation's resources, leaving hundreds of people destitute and forcing them out of their homes. I wish to meet with your head of state and negotiate a deal with him. Please, I need to meet him. Sorrento's smile gradually faded and was replaced by a flat gaze. I'm not sure if I believe your story or if it's all a lie, but I can't let that happen. His hands gently sank to his sides and his gaze met Hashirama's. I know you and your group are literally at the epicenter of strange activities and fluctuating energy readings in this area, and for whatever reason you're here, I've come here to question you. Hashirama's placid demeanor disappeared, and his look became as ferocious as Sorrento's. I'm afraid I can't let you do that. I'm not even asking. The friction between the two camps gradually increased. While the two leaders faced each other down, each subordinate began to modify their position for the best mobility. Sorrento's fist flashed and a shockwave of force rushed towards Hashirama's head faster than the eye could see. The first Hokage leaned to the side, narrowly avoiding the magical strike and exploding through the tree behind him. He grabbed inside his pack and flung a kunai at the wizard saint's brow, not shocked that the guy caught it between his fingers. Ninjas and royal knights dashed from their posts and charged at each other. When swords clashed, sparks flew and jutsu and magic were launched in all directions. The two leaders leapt out of the way and began rushing into the woodland. While Hashirama rushed past them, Sorrento began to concentrate his shock power and threw a volley of explosive blows. He got sick of witnessing the ninja commander evade his attacks and decided to launch a massive area attack. He clutched his hands together as the air around them became noticeably warped. He headed at the older man, his hands emitting ripples of dazzling white energy, and a loud ringing began to resound through the air. Shocking front. The massive magical attack flew at Hashirama at terrifying speeds, resonating with a tremendous explosion. The unknown onslaught did not frighten the ninja commander, who clasped his hands together and molded his chakra. Between the Senju man and the magical attack, a gigantic spire of wood came up, halting the shockwave strike but splitting the Mokuton creature into splinters. Sorrento was so taken aback by the unusual approach that he was almost caught off guard when Hashirama began to create dozens of trees from the ground and directed them at the younger guy. Mokuton. The nativity of a world of trees. The trees began to sprout and attempted to coil around the wizard saint. The royal captain desperately avoided the trees, but they followed him. He began racing up the rising wood, but the trees grew around him, squeezing around his limbs as if they had a mind of their own. They kidnapped the royal captain and tied his arms and legs together until he emitted a powerful shockwave that broke the wood that was holding him down. When he observed the man pull off that accomplishment, Hashirama's brow wrinkled. People in this world had a wide range of magic, and unlike jutsu, they didn't need to build up their power using hand seals. Sorrento directed his shockwaves into the soles of his boots and leapt into the air, diving for the ninja below him at rocket-like velocities. As the shock assault slammed the ground and cratered the dirt beneath him, Hashirama flipped through the air and escaped. The wizard saint leapt out of the dust cloud and began fighting the senior shinobi. The power of his shock magic uprooted the ground around them with each swing he threw, creating enormous blasts of sound. The shinobi, however, remained unaffected by this increase in power, parrying each hit with the back of his arms. As Sorrento became more anxious for a blow, Hashirama maintained a stern look on the knight. Hashirama finally threw out both fists, catching them by the wrist and holding the knight down. When Sorrento was kidnapped by the more experienced fighter, he froze in shock and looked up from where he was caught. Hashirama's eyes were obscured by his hair, and his grasp tightened around the knight's wrists, causing him to hiss in anguish. I wanted to come to this world in peace, hoping that a world without war would sympathize with those who have suffered the pain of battle, but I suppose even here, there are those who won't help others unless they break the status quo. He lifted his head and glared at the knight, making Sorrento shake in fear at the sight of the man's cold eyes and the immense pressure he exuded. Then I will help my world find peace, with or without you, he exclaimed as he tossed the man up and drew his fist back. Sorrento retreated and stood his ground, wrapping as much of his shock magic around his arms as he could to protect himself. Hashirama's fist became embedded in the shock guard, prompting Sorrento to gasp in pain and buckle under the incredible force of his single strike. The royal captain was launched into the newly formed tree line, creating a massive trench in the forest. Hashirama turned away from where he had dispatched his opponent and returned to where his troop had tented. He leapt through the tree line and returned to his team without a second thought. The ground exploded moments later, and the wizard saint dragged himself out of the rubble. Despite being thrown through many meters of wood and dirt, he appeared unharmed, with only a bloodied lip and some scuffed-up garments. That Hashirama man was a force to be reckoned with. Too powerful. He fled, but his punch was powerful enough to paralyze a wizard saint long enough for him to flee. That was out of the ordinary. Damn it, where'd that bastard go? He thought as he looked about the area. Sorrento raced back to where his company was fighting the ninja team, only to find his group alone in the clearing, blocked by a wall of tall wood. When the man's superior returned to the battlefield, one of his subordinates went to his side. Captain Sorrento. The criminals escaped, sir. We were holding off most of the team before their leader arrived and cut off their route with this wall, he said. Sorrento shifted his gaze between the man and the previously mentioned wall. Why didn't you pursue? When he asked that inquiry, his subordinate shrank. Sir, we would have pursued them, but one of our men suffered a fatal injury. Sorrento turned to see the rest of his men encircling a fallen soldier with pale complexion, empty eyes, and a vast puddle of blood beneath his slit jugular. Sorrento's eyes widened in disbelief at how easily one of his men could be slain so swiftly. These folks were extremely dangerous, and Hashirama, he was too powerful. He couldn't abandon these people. The wizard saint began to clench his fist in rage as he walked over to the wooden wall and placed his hand on its structure. The wood was warped for a split second before exploding in a spray of jagged wood and splinters. His guys all turned to gaze at him as his cloak flew in the breeze from his technique. Sorrento turned to face his soldiers, a righteous rage in his eyes. Come on. I'm not going to let them get away with disgracing us like this. We're not going to let them get away. Yukiha peered through the curtain of the wagon she and her friends had found themselves in. The town they'd arrived in was now just a faint outline in the distance. But, happily, the party of knights they had encountered had also vanished. She sighed as she sat back in her seat. You seem tense, milady, the well-dressed fairy tale member said as he moved up to the young Senju woman's side and took her hand in his. You know, it's a shame to see such a beautiful and gifted young lady as yourself seem so troubled. If you like, we can get off somewhere and I can help melt all of your troubles away, the handsome man remarked sensuously as he kissed her hand. Yukiha stared down at the man uncomfortably, frightened that she was stuck in this circumstance with no way out. That's very nice of you, Bob-san, but I'm fine with being tense. It keeps me on my toes. She grabbed his shoulder and swung him around to face the Ambu ninja who were staring at the fairy mage as he attempted to woo Yukiha-sama. But, with the way our men are looking at you, if anyone should be tense, it's you. Bob just stared at them stoically for a few seconds before breaking into another passionate smile. That's fine by me. The only thing better than one-on-one is a group party. What do you think, boys? The Ambu didn't know how to respond. It was unsettling. And they were now uneasy in the tight area with the party dude. Yukiha laughed as he watched the weird man approach their trained murder squad and make them uneasy. Oto-sama, are you okay? She said, looking across her seat to see her father kneading his rigid forearms. Oh yeah. I'm fine, Yuki, Hashirama answered, masking his worries with a smile. He didn't want to look at it, but he knew his arms were badly damaged from the punches Wizard Saint threw at him. He didn't realize it at the time, but that man was pretty formidable, and if Hashirama hadn't incapacitated him when he did, their battle could have lasted much longer. He had no idea what a Wizard Saint was, but if they were all as powerful as Sorrento, they must have been the world's equivalent of the Cages. If you want, I'll look at any of your injuries after I've helped your friend, the young, pink-haired medic stated on the wagon floor as she treated some burns sustained by one of the SEAL specialists during the struggle. In reality, the majority of the team appeared to have taken some damage from the Knights squad. And the Knights were also injured in kind. In fact, one poor man was assassinated by one of their Anbu. That didn't help their first ideal of arriving here peacefully. The voice from the front of the wagon cried back at them as Ango was searching through the SEAL scrolls she was able to acquire before they fled. "Hey, whoever your boss is, would you please come up here?" Hashirama peered through the cloth fold that separated the carriage from the wagon. He noticed a young man with long, spiky blonde hair steering the horse-drawn carriage and peering over his shoulder at the towering ninja. "Hey. Hello. I left the rest of my team in that town to try to calm the townspeople down before things get out of hand, and hopefully they'll be able to make it down our way into the next town without incident." Hashirama sat down and bent his head to the shorter guy. "Yes. And thank you for your assistance. Not many would take us off the streets and heal our wounds when we have injured comrades." Makarov agreed, nodding his head and humming. "Yeah, well, in their defense, they're not used to seeing people with bloody clothes and scorched skin walking through their hometown like it's a parade, but you don't have to thank us." He whipped the rope and looked over at the man through the corner of his eye. "But even we have to take notice of an odd problem like this." Hashirama tried to mask his concern, but couldn't help but grasp his hand, leaving Makarov with a contented smile. "I'm not going to throw you out, not while you're injured and have no place to stay. However, if you want our assistance, you must tell me everything that happened. Who are you? Where are you from?" Hashirama grinned and faintly chuckled. "My name is Hashirama Senju, and I have a long story," he said to the fairy mage. Makarov simply smirked at Senju, saying, "Well, my name is Makarov Drayar, and we've got time. Hash 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 hunter hash 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 hash." The old fairy geezer looked up from his still drink and out at his young children, who were merrily conversing, bickering, and fighting with one another. Regardless of how these young children acted, they had all suffered suffering that defined their lives. His and Hashirama's pasts were as difficult to forget. Mistakes, suffering, loss, and fear may devour your life and leave you an empty shell if you don't deal with them. But they became new and improved here, between these walls and among these people. They made new friends. Competitors to help them improve. Those they could look up to and those they felt obligated to lead. But, more importantly, while you were in fairy tale with your family, you could deal with your pain together. As long as they had each other, they were never alone. Makarov might feel like he had accomplished his goal as long as they had something to believe in. Senju, the wrinkled old man, gripped his mug a little tighter at the notion of how much his life had finally improved in the last year. He smiled at the sight of his granddaughter encouraging all of the younger mages. Makarov Dono. I know you probably think I shouldn't have to say it anymore, but thank you for everything." Makarov simply grinned and gently giggled. "Kihihi, no problem. Hash 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 hunter hash 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 hash. Okay, you brats, listen up." The hubbub in the guild hall quickly slowed down, and everyone turned to face the bar counter, where their master stood with his staff in hand. "Well, everyone, it's that time of year again." His delighted outburst was met with cheers and wolf whistles. "Time for the S-class promotion exam. Yeah, hhhhhhhh. With your strength and heart, you have all made me proud over the last year. But, as with any other tournament, not everyone can win. And numerous of your buddies have proven themselves ready for the next stage this year." When the master took his pause, everyone fell silent. The participants for this year's S-class trial are Conbolt Macau. People congratulated the scruffy-looking man with dark blue hair on his back, and he grinned softly. "Well, I guess everybody gets a last chance to try." Wikaba Mining. "Yahoo, tonight I'm going to drink myself happy." Makarov smirked at his guild. Kana Alberona. Everyone turned to gaze at the young brown-haired girl with the mug up to her mouth, and she blinked in shock before everyone around her began to shout for her. Yeah. Kana, you were an inspiration. One of the kids succeeded. Way to go, Kana. The young card user couldn't believe she'd been chosen for one of the guild's biggest events, and a slow but wide grin formed on her face until she couldn't help herself and glommed the nearest item to her, which in this case was a smiling levy. Dear Mirajane Strauss. Ha ha ha. Yeah. Everyone was celebrating and cheering for the daring takeover mage, who had the largest smile on her face, as the oldest white-haired girl cheered and pulled her little brother and sister into headlocks. And finally, Makarov froze and glanced out as everyone watched him with bated breath. Scarlet, Urza. Mahiro had her arms around Urza's shoulders and was hugging her tightly, cheering and congratulating the scarlet-haired girl. Koyuki was happily giggling in Urza's lap, not understanding what was going on, but everyone was happy and that was enough for her. Urza was still so shocked that she didn't observe Natsu shrieking angrily about him not qualifying or Mira spinning about with Elfman and Gray screaming at the ends of her spiral, but as her disbelief faded, a wide smile appeared on her face instead. The trial will begin in exactly 1 week. Good luck and be prepared for everything. Urza. Urza. Mahiro began shaking Urza back and forth. You succeeded. I knew you could do it. Oh, I am very proud of you. Yeah, Urza responded, puzzled by what was going on, shaking her head and looking up at Mahiro. Wait, why aren't you in the exam, Mahiro? Come on, Urza, I hardly ever take requests as it is. I spend the majority of my time in the guild with Makarov-san and Koyuki. And don't be concerned about me. Urza, you did it. You're going to be in S class. Ji-chan. Why did Urza, Kana, and Mira make it but not me? That's not right. Natsu, you're strong, believe me, Makarov said as he groaned and looked over at the rose-haired lad eager to dispute his argument. But becoming an S class requires more than just strength. To acquire the label of S class, you must have skill, experience, heart, brains, and a strong sense of justice. How in the world did Gildarts pass his test? He doesn't have any of that nonsense. Because I'm just so manly, it made up for everything else, brat, Gildarts said, ignoring Natsu's blatant hatred in his gaze and taking a gulp of his booze. Hashiramaji-chan, you've got to make them see sense, please. The ninja could only laugh at the Dragonslayer's attempt at compromise. Sorry Natsu, I can't help you there. Natsu's head dropped in sorrow, similar to how Hashirama so quickly sank into depression. The little blue cat swooped through the air and settled on Natsu's head. Haha, Natsu, maybe next year, but I have my doubts. Urza. The redhead looked over to see Kana approaching her with pleasure in her eyes. It was taking everything she had not to run around in joy at qualifying for the exam. We actually got there. I'm overjoyed. Believe me, Kana. Mira walked over with a proud step, leaving a dizzy heap of Gray and Elfman in her wake. We earned this. But we can't all be happy for long. Her proud smile transformed to a daring smirk directed at the 2 other girls. Only one of us will win the S class, and they will be crowned Queen of Fairy Tale. Are you both up for the challenge? They were hesitant at first, but they both shook their heads and mimicked the Strauss girl's smirk. Mirajane looked across with a seductive smile. So, what's with Naruto? I didn't make it, Naruto said, his face mashed into the table where the girls were seated. How could I possibly miss it? What in the world happened? Ah, there, Mira said as she patted his head patronizingly. Just let big sister Mira take care of you. But what if I'm older than you? Shish, don't put up a fight. I'm gonna ask Gigi what the hell is going on. Naruto smacked the table and pushed himself up, scowling. Don't worry, Naruto. I talked with Makarov-san about who I thought deserved a spot in the exam, Mahiro said, as Naruto and the girls stared across at her. I gave him some suggestions about who he should consider for the placement, but any final decision was on his part. What the hell is going on, Mahiro? Is this because I didn't change Koyuki's diaper last week? That's pitiful. Nothing so petty, you idiot. You did not qualify because you were not fully prepared for the post. She turned to face Naruto after noticing his confused expression. I believe you are strong enough, Naruto, and I know how hard you work. And when the time comes, you'll know how to get yourself out of a bad situation and kick ass. But you haven't learned to accept responsibility for your acts or to have complete faith in your team." Through his puzzled expression, she added, "We were talking about the S-class request you took last year, Naruto." She knew she had struck a nerve because his eyes widened in recognition as she said it. His reasoning was that you didn't even try to team up with Gildarts or Laxus, that you took several artifacts from your mission, even if they were copies, and that you didn't finish your probation. "Yes, I did." "No, you did not. You completed all of your tasks, but you were late for each one, and when Makarov-san offered you another, you were too preoccupied with chakra training. Speaking of which, your damage reports have skyrocketed in the last year since you began using your chakra." She rose from her seat and patted Naruto on the shoulder, saying, "I'm sorry, kid, but he can't promote you until you show that you can handle the responsibilities and power you've been given. Perhaps next year." Mira Jane smiled cheekily and patted the boy on the back before departing. Kana quickly apologized to her older buddy before leaving to celebrate her nomination. He banged his face on the table again, leaving only him and Urza at the table. Urza smiled softly at her closest friend's misery, wanting to console him. "If you want, Naruto, we can go out and get some ramen and cake. And after that." Urza. She paused and allowed him to raise his head. Her whiskered companion, contrary to her expectations, had a confident smirk and a delighted twinkle in his eyes. "I'll just have to get to S-class or something next year. But you still have a chance to get ahead of me right now. You also made a pledge. Which implies you have to pass the exam no matter what. Got it?" He raised his arm at an angle in front of her. Urza smiled back and nodded, crossing her arm with his and making a X, damn straight. A large mountain range that stretched through both countries lay a few miles outside the boundary of Fury and Seven. A big metal construction that reached halfway up the mountain's height was buried between the space of two of the range's tallest mountains. The emblem of a fist covered in flames was cut into the metal on the front of this edifice. This was one of many damnation bases erected throughout Earthland. The huge pressure being released inside the large building structure buried in the valley began to tremble and split violently. Many local residents began to flood out of the front entrance in terror, pushing one another out of the way in order to reach safety. A giant guy and a slender lady stormed along the hall where the massive energy was stored, within the massive skyscraper. Warblade Uvajan was a former gun for hire and Damnation Guild 2nd Division General. "What the hell is going on?" he exclaimed as he hurried down the corridor, his big sword bouncing around with his motions. "Is someone after Master?" Marika the Disassembler, Master Assassin and 3rd Division General of Damnation, stood alongside him. She chuckled while panting her way towards her master's private chambers. "I'm not sure, but Ji-chan shouldn't have any trouble with any little punk who comes after his head. This is extraordinary." When they arrived at the door, Marika grabbed the handle and yanked it open. Only for the door to be blown off its hinges and thrown down the corridor, with Marika's arm still attached to it. The two generals examined the flying door before turning their attention to the woman's shoulder, which was missing an arm. Her hand rushed back from its position down the corridor as she held out her stump. With its break-apart magic, her arm reattached itself, and she smiled, good as new. The two generals dashed into the chamber, only to be confronted by a gigantic wall of pressure unleashed by the man in the center of the room. The 90-year-old man with the enormous scar down the right side of his face was holding one of his subordinates by the collar like he was lifting up a piece of paper inside the wall of pure pressure. On the other hand, there was a report that flopped around due to the strong wind. This immense shock power was unleashed by the erstwhile wizard saint and captain of the Royal Guard, 1st Division General, and Guild Master of every damnation unit across Earthland. Alexander Sorrento, Tyrant King. How long have you known this? Why didn't I know you received this information? The grunt in his palm was terrified, fearing for his life at the hands of the powerhouse he was following. "I'm sorry, sir. We have numerous other more important reports in." "This is the most important thing." "Nothing." Marika and Uvajan promptly pinned both of his arms, and the grunt fell on his ass and raced away from the area before being slain. "Master. You need to relax. You're going to reveal our position, Ji-chan. If you don't breathe, you might just wipe out the entire mountain." Both of the formidable criminals were knocked back by the power their master unleashed, his fury boiling over as he gazed down at the piece of paper once again. It was usually merely a field report on the legal and illegal guilds in Fury that they kept an eye on in case of an emergency, along with photographs of the guilds they were tracking and files with images of their recent activity. But this was unique. This was the most current roster and image change for Fairy Tail. One name stuck out among the others on the sheet of official names they were able to acquire through local sources. Mahiro Senju. And there was an old man talking with a group of snot-nosed brats in one of the photos. An elderly man, at least a century old, dressed in antique garments that covered much of his body. However, Sorrento recognized him. Even after all these years, he would never forget that expression. I knew at least one of them had survived. I'm not sure how, but it felt like they were still alive. But after all these years, after all this pain, you finally present yourself again, Hashirama. Sorrento's magical strength began to dissipate, and the ringing noises faded as well. Marika and Uvajin raised their eyes to their lord as he lowered his arms to his sides once more. Uvajin. Yes, sir? Marika. Yeah. Collect as many men as you can spare. One of our nation's own guilds has betrayed us. They contain a weapon capable of destroying the fundamental foundation of the universe. And now we must put a stop to it before it causes any further harm. He turned around, displaying the hatred and fury that was building up in his lone eye as veins emerged on his face. This will be over before he causes any more harm. Hashirama first, then Fairy Tail, to be continued.
That's it for this podcast. Thank you for listening to this video. I hope you did enjoy this part of the story, and if you did, like, share, and subscribe for more. And thank you all for helping support, and have a great day.